Live from the Below the Yellow Line studio, it's the Below the Yellow Line podcast.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Below the Yellow Line podcast. A guest that I am very excited to have on today, a man who has seen NASCAR, the ARCA Menards Series, for over 3.5 decades, Brad Smith. How are you doing?
I'm doing good today. How are you doing?
Doing great. Doing good.
Good.
I have some questions for you, but first, you announced some big news today for your upcoming race this weekend. You guys have a new associate sponsor in Drill Brush, so just tell us a little bit about that.
Well, our PR person working with another media person came across this deal. I don't know exactly how long they've been working on it, but it's a one-race deal for DuQuoin, and they're going to be on the quarter panel of the car for the race. And we're looking forward to representing them, and maybe this will lead to something big for us in the future. And if not, hey, at least it's a good one-race deal for us, and it helps keep us on track.
Absolutely. It's always great, especially, in a series like ARCA where the sponsor deals necessarily aren't as huge. It's always great to see a company and a team work together, because without sponsors, you couldn't do what you do, and then by extension, I couldn't do what I do. So definitely appreciate all the sponsors out there. So we'll be looking out for Drill Brush on the car this weekend. As I mentioned in the open, you are a veteran of this sport. And it's interesting because I've interviewed a lot of like teenagers and young drivers in their 20s, because that shows how much the sport's changed. You got guys in the modified tour and the ARCA series that, don't even have a legal driver's license yet, but they have a NASCAR license, and that's okay. But how did you first get your start? What was kind of the catalyst for you to jump off into a career that spans so long?
Well, it's a long story, but if you got time, I can tell it to you. Way back when I was working at Chrysler, and I wanted to get into, the local racetracks, running a Chrysler product. They were hard to find, and I went and talked to a local engine builder, and he recommended, rather than spend the big money for a new motor, that I go talk to Buddy Arrington, who was the last guy to run Chryslers in NASCAR at the time, and see if he had an inexpensive used motor that we could use. And of course, while we were down there in the corner of Buddy's shop, we saw an old Chrysler Cordoba, and it was too old to run in NASCAR, but you could still run those in ARCA. So we went home, signed a couple of those things in the mail that say you've been pre-approved for a loan, and got a few dollars through the mail, and went down and bought that car from Buddy Arrington, and that's how we got started in ARCA. I mean, it was almost an accident, or a fluke at least, and we started there, and we stayed there ever since.
That's awesome. That's a great story. Buddy Arrington is one of those guys that when you look back through the pages of NASCAR history, he kind of gets lost, but there's so many guys out there that have great stories of him, and that's awesome to add you to that list. If there's one underrated legend of the sport I could meet, Buddy Arrington would definitely be at the top of my list.
And he was very dedicated to Chrysler. So
he was.
That made him special to a lot of us guys that were Chrysler guys at the time, too.
You do see a lot of manufacturer loyalty nowadays. Everybody talks when you go to a super speedway about that, but back in the day, those guys were devoted. I was reading Bill Elliott's memoir the other day, and he talked about how his dad would never let Bill drive anything but a Ford until it eventually got to the point where he had to when he drove a Dodge for Ray Evernham. So awesome to see that manufacturer loyalty popping back up again. The next question I have is as a long-time veteran of the sport, like I said, over 3.5 decades, and I believe you actually hold the record for the most consecutive starts in ARCA. What have you seen change the most? There's been so many changes in culture, car, horsepower, all that, but what is the one thing that kind of stands out that's changed the most?
Probably the amount of money it takes to still race these days. Back when I first got into it, you could buy a used NASCAR type car, which was too old to run in NASCAR, but you could still run in ARCA, and we could get those cars for pretty good deals. And you could take your shot at super speedway racing. ARCA was probably the lowest level that ran Daytona at the time, and Talladega, and then eventually the intermediate tracks. So and it was not unusual to have 75 or 80 cars show up for a 40-car race. Um, but things have changed. The cars have gotten a lot more expensive. They're a lot safer, but some of the rule changes have made it a bit more expensive, and just hanging in there has been tough for the smaller teams.
For sure, the money that's in the sport right now, it's a good and a bad thing. It's good that there is so much money invested in the sport, but at the same time, you look at a smaller team, and some of them struggle. But deals like Drill Brush this weekend coming on, I'm sure, help that a little bit. So moving on here, Brad, and I just asked you what has changed the most in your 35 years of driving, but now switching over to the complete opposite side. What do you think has changed the least?
The fans, and I think the racers themselves. The racers are still dedicated. I mean, we'll do whatever it takes to get to a race. Just short of selling our soul to the devil, I guess. But that part hasn't changed. The enthusiasm hasn't changed. The fans are still loyal as hell. Even in this really divided political climate we have, it doesn't matter whether you're conservative, liberal, whatever. When you're at the racetrack, you're a race fan.
Mm-hmm.
And I just love seeing people walk around with different drivers' T-shirts on. You love seeing the little kids walk around in like NASCAR pajamas. The people on the infield haven't changed. If you go walk down on the infield in your driving uniform, they'll feed you, they'll offer you a beer, you're like their best friend. And I enjoy that part of racing. And I appreciate what the fans do to get to the track too, because it's gotten more, tickets have gotten expensive. Hotel rooms have gone crazy since the pandemic. Rooms we could use to get for $65, $70 a night, now we're closer to $200. And when you're a family, that's biting into your wallet pretty good. So the fact that the fans are still coming, I really like that, and I'm glad that enthusiasm hasn't changed.
Yeah, NASCAR ran a great ad at the Daytona 500 this year, talking about that. The one thing that's never going to change is the anticipation and the fans. And you mentioning that, it makes me so happy as a fan. I mean, I guess I'm a media person, but as a fan, just to see that you still see that, and you talk about regardless of political affiliation or any of that, when you're at the track, you're a race fan. And that's the great thing about this sport, is that it draws all of us together for one thing that we love. And we're relatively niche as far as sports fans go, but we are extremely loyal. And that's one thing that you really cannot take away from a racing fan in any series, but especially here in the States in NASCAR. I assume you have a lot of great memories and moments with fans, especially, maybe in the infield. But do you have a favorite moment or memory from racing? I mean, there's got to be a lot to choose from, but what is that number one standout moment?
Going to Daytona and making the race for the first time, you feel like, hey, I'm at least knocking on the door of the big time now. And that's pretty cool because, a couple of years before that, I never dreamed I'd even be sitting in a race car, let alone, racing at Daytona. And when I went to the driving school, I went to Buck Baker School before, we actually got the race car. And when he told me he thought I had what it took to make it, he said, just go find yourself some sponsorship. That felt good for somebody like Buck Baker to say that. And that was a real great moment. So, and again, every track has its uniqueness, its unique memories. People have asked me what my favorite track is, and I'll be honest with you, it's hard to pick one because they all have their little traditions. You go through the gate, like we just went to Milwaukee. We hadn't been there in a few years, but we love that place. The fans in Wisconsin are great. You go somewhere like Talladega, and they just go crazy down there over racing, and it's just, I don't know, the ambience of working with, or being around the fans. we really appreciate them being there. It's not just about racing the car; it's the whole experience.
Yeah, that's awesome. Fans are such a big part of it. And I love that's what you keep coming back to. That's so awesome to hear. And, especially somebody like you who's been doing it so long and has seen, all these generations of fans come and go, generations of car come and go. So many great moments and memories, I'm sure, for you to pick from. But that's awesome. You just talked about the great side, the good side of Talladega Super Speedway. But in 2015, Talladega kind of went the opposite way. I mean, I'm not going to ask you to delve too deeply into that crash. I mainly kind of want to focus on your comeback and winning the Spirit Award. But what was it like? I guess I'll ask you, what was it like going through that crash? And what was the recovery process like? What is it like to recover from something like that? Not only physically, but mentally. You got back in a race car after crashing that hard in a race car. How do you have the mental courage to do that?
Well, I mean, you've heard the old saying, when the horse throws you, you got to get right back up on it. But that's pretty much the same thing with crashing on a race car. I'll admit I was a little bit apprehensive the first time we got back in the car after that. But, you just have to have confidence in yourself. You have to have confidence in the car, confidence in your crew that, they're going to put a good piece under you. And I've had all that. So, getting back in the car wasn't that big of a choice. I mean, we knew we were coming back. We weren't done. But, yeah, it was a little bit of a harrowing experience. I know when I was heading for that wall and the throttle was stuck, there was nothing I could do. I thought I was dead. I really did. And, when I was still conscious after the wreck, I was actually quite surprised. But it just hurt a little bit. And we went through and, did whatever the doctors told us to do to try and heal up and come back.
That's wow. I can't imagine. We were watching Saturday night the Cup race, and we saw Ryan Preece barrel roll through the infield, and seeing your wreck. I think I remember watching that race live. Just incredible that you guys, that shows that race car drivers are slightly insane. It's the good insane, but just to come back. I remember hearing an old story about David Pearson in the Southern 500, how he hit the wall so hard he thought he was dead. He woke up though, and he thought he knew he was dead because his shoes had come off. And he'd heard that if a wreck was so hard it knocked your shoes off, you're probably dead. But he saw his shoes. He was still alive, and obviously he went on to build a Hall of Fame career. So thankfully he was okay. Thankfully you were okay. Alrighty. Couple more questions for you, Brad. I feel like I beat this dead horse into the ground a lot in this interview, but you are a veteran. You're a guy who's been driving, not forever, but for a long time, so experienced. We talk about guys, when we talk about guys with the most starts, we talk about the Iron Man, Terry Labonte. We talk about, Ricky Rudd. But I believe you are the all-time consecutive start leader in ARCA. Are young guys coming up in the garage area and asking you for advice? What is it like to be a guy that has been doing it for so long, is so talented, and has so much experience?
Well, usually those young guys have crew chiefs and coaches, so they don't necessarily have to ask me how to do it. And they pay big money for those crew chiefs and for that advice, so they're going to take advantage of that. And a lot of my racing has been more at the back of the field, and it's a little bit of a different kind of race when you're a budget racer rather than a all-out, big team racer. So, a lot of the guys that are getting into the sport that don't have a lot of money, they'll ask me some questions, like how do you do it and all that. And, I just tell them you got to learn to run to your budget. I learned that from James Hilton. When I was racing with James, I saw James do a couple things that I didn't understand, but then I eventually figured out why he did it. And I kind of started doing the same thing because, at the end of his driving career, James didn't have any money. And so I just kind of did what he did. And then when he needed a driver and I started driving for him, I mean, I knew the routine. There was just two of us that didn't have any money racing together. So, I knew we had to bring the car home in one piece no matter what. We didn't necessarily take foolish chances. We didn't even take a lot of chances. We just sort of found our spot on the track. We raced with the guys that had cars equal to us and didn't try and overdrive it. And the big thing was just to not over rev or blow the motor and not crash the car. So that's a little bit different than the guys up front. They're going for the win, and that's what they're paid to do, and that's what they're doing. And a lot of them do it pretty well.
A lot of them do, and you have, don't discredit yourself. You've done pretty well yourself. I mean, I was looking at your racing reference page earlier, and the amount of, first of all, the amount of consistency and just how many races you started, but a good amount of top 10 points finishes on there, a lot of top 15s, just solid runs, and your top 10 in the points right now, I believe, in the ARCA Menards Series. I almost wanted to call it the Goodies Dash Series for a second, but that doesn't even exist anymore. But thank you so much for coming on the show. Can't wait to watch you again this weekend and with drill brush on the side of the car. But if you want to thank any more partners and tell all the fans watching where your next race is and maybe where we can see it.
Yeah, we're down in DuQuoin in Illinois, where it's a 1 mile dirt track. It's a great little track. I'd love to thank the people at Drill Brush for, getting on board with us for a race. Hopefully we'll represent them well and they'll be proud of what we do and it helps them sell some product. And of course, I'd like to thank my team. It's all volunteer people. They work just as hard as I do at it, and they don't get any of the glory really. So I got to really give them credit for the success of this team and for sure the longevity of it.
For sure. Going to be a great weekend out there. Love to see some ARCA cars on a dirt track. We had Brayton Laster on the show, the Pizza Man, on the show a few weeks ago, and he's going to be running that race as well this weekend. So it's going to be great to see a couple guys out there. And best of luck to you and the whole team, not just this weekend, but for the rest of the year. Just keep doing what you're doing, and just can't wait to see you keep doing it for many years to come. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.